So let's start on 15.1. We're going to add some better error handling on the geolocation. We added some in the challenge already for attendance for you to look at adding just the try catch in order to at least get that working. And then also we'll learn about fetch. Okay, so I have this file up. So what you're going to do here is first I decided rather than to code all this, let's actually just do a little bit of copy and paste because this is code we've done before. So at the top of your AQI integrator file, you will add this just for the DOM references. And here we're following that same pattern of referencing the section to get a reference, and then we're using query selector with the IDs to have each one. And I'll show you this in output in a minute. So then inside, now this is all in the integrator file. So then in the inside of the load and display before the try block, then you will add this first to set some initial UI, right? So attempting to get your location, right? We're going to actually give them a day and time. So this is actually a good time to just, I'm trying to remember. I don't think we've done new here, and I could be wrong, or we could have done it somewhere. But in this case, we're setting up a new date object. And what's great about starting to look at new again today is that we're going to use this in our actual code. But we don't fully drop into using OOP, object-oriented programming, to where you create objects from a blueprint concept, and then we customize those objects. Now in this case, we're actually using built-in methods. So we're calling create a new date object, and then we're calling to locate local time string to get the actual local time wherever you're located. And then we're going to set some style. And then we'll add some functionality here. And then after the catch, we'll actually change that error message to error.message. And we'll talk about why this is true as we move through. And then we'll actually just put some additional content here that we have, the error message itself, and we'll do a new date again because there could be a difference between when the user originally came in and when they actually came back and updated that. So let's actually here, right, now, and I believe here we go. Okay, so if you get all that set up, and I'm going to go ahead and right now I just did this. Mine is currently in the working state. So we do have, and I'm trying to remember where we set this. I think it's in, yeah, so in this case, I was just trying to remember where we set, right. So inside of here is where we set the location found, attempting to get the AQI, which we have not coded, and we will code today. Actually, I think this is actually also part of what we needed to add. No, we added that last time, I'm pretty sure. Let me double check on that. So then I did miss that, so I went back and added it. So then in this case, after the user location, then you would place this content, and what that gives you is this location found. So this is the successful path right now, fetching AQI, which we're gonna start working on in 15.2. So in this case, how you know this works, right? How do we know is we actually first test the good path that we got, the Latin long. So now I'm actually going to, I think let's see, if I just refresh, no, this is where I have to go back in. I swear to God, there's got to be a better way to do this, but as of today, I don't have it. So now, when I do this and I say never allow, then I get, so we now at least have an output, so we don't have the error message or the content showing up for this, because in this case we had the catch block thrown. We not available. We still have the date and time, so that's the nice thing about having it here. It shows when they attempted to do it, but if it doesn't get it, then we still on the error message we get that date and time. Okay, so that is the state of, this should be the state of your code at this. And I think I might have added this as well. So if you don't see that on the console, you can also add this here, because it's going to be something we're going to start talking about next. Okay, so let's see. After the catch, I think I talked about this, is making sure you have this. So this is the output. You should see do tests for the good path, meaning we got the Latin long, and then also the denied path, so we can play with that. And right now, have it in the denied state, because that's actually what we're going to move into talking about. Okay. So what I've added here is because I want us to think about, I actually did a little research because as I was thinking about this code right here, where we actually have, let me drop that for a second and make this a little bigger, where we just reject and we send back the error. The error is still wrapped, and it's still in, and in this case in the integrator, when it comes back, it is still an object, okay, because we actually, that's the way it's set up. But in this case, it's not the best. We can actually do even a step more. So what I did, and I've included here, and I want you to read this, is why return new error, just error versus error, okay? And it's important to start understanding that when we create new error, because you'll see this commonly when we're doing asynchronous, not just returning whatever the string equivalent of that is, but actually setting up a new error isn't a promise, is how it's handled in the try catch. Okay, so it's just best practice. And so, and then it talks about, you know, when you reject, it's passing a promise, you just passing a value to the catch. Now, in our case, because of the way geolocation works, we're actually getting a little more along the way. But for this one, we actually want something called the stack, because the stack, and what's interesting is stack is the equivalent here of looking at where this actually happened. But oftentimes, when you're running this type of doing this kind of development, you may have some automated systems and you want to be able to provide more content. And again, we're setting this up because this is a common practice, and that's really what some of this talked about, is that it's really the best practice to actually call new error. But I want to show you this in terms of this right here. And really this kind of sets us up for the code challenge. So right here where we're returning error, okay, because we're running an arrow function, and sometimes it's just good to remind ourselves when we have a single statement that we're returning, right, we don't actually have to include our curly brackets, right? So now in this case that actually wasn't the best one to show because it actually goes all the way, but notice how in here we actually have the curly brackets here that indicate, hey, this is your successful callback, and when we do comma here, this is your on error. And because we're only having one statement, we're not going to include the brackets, but now we actually want to. So in order to do this, one of the things I do is I actually go open, right? And then what I do, because sometimes this can get a little confusing to know where to put things, right? Is like, okay, so now, oh yeah, I got an opening and a close. Good. So now I can do more here. Okay, and why would I want to do that? First, just want to cover that concept of, you know, sometimes when you read code, if you see one statement, it's sometimes easy to forget that you actually can run more if you want to. So let's actually do this. Let's do console.log, okay, error, okay, and what we want to do, actually that's not what we want to do, hold on. Yeah, it is what we want to do. Actually, in this case, we'll console log it after. Let's actually set up a variable, and it's called error message, okay? And that error message is going to be equal to new error, okay? And we're going to call it on error, okay? So in other words, set up a new object, an error object that actually gives more content to the actual error message itself, okay? And then in this case, we'll console log, okay, error message, and then we'll reject with the error message, okay, error message, okay. And we'll look at how it's different, okay? So let's actually come over here. Good. So now here in, and I already have this here in the console, I can already see I'm getting an object, I'm getting a little more on here, but what is it? And this is the write-up that showed us, is we want to do something like maybe stack, right? Call stack. Did I include that? Yeah, the dot stack property. Okay, and actually I probably should have shown you before that we didn't have that ability, so maybe this is the reverse way to show you this concept, but now we actually can. So how can I see that in code is I could come in here and I could go to the data service, I could pause it right here. Okay, I could refresh the page, it's going to pause right here, and I could come down and I could go error message. Okay, message dot stack. So what this gives me, in this case, it may not look that different, but it actually is fairly different in the sense that I could grab this from a programming standpoint, because remember, what's in the console is not necessarily something I can grab in the console, but in this case I can, specifically showing me, right, in this case, where the error occurred. Okay, so that's where this gives you more of that flexibility, and it gives you better practice when we're handling error messages, because this is a really important part of making an asynchronous call. So now if we wanted to, we could run a dot stack. Okay. So let's actually do that in our code as well. So now that we've done this, and I'm just going to now go over to the integrator file, I guess I had it on the other side, is I could also, in this case, right, actually call, theoretically, I should now just be able to call stack on that. Let's see if that's the case, right? Okay, now in this case, we actually saw it here. Let me get rid of it here, just so it doesn't show up twice and kind of make us wonder why. Okay. So now in here, I see it coming out of here, and error.stack. Right, so I get more of that content that I can then act upon because I have error. In this case, it returned, remember? We are calling it, we're rejecting with error message, that's what we're calling it, but then in the integrator, it doesn't matter, we're referencing that error as it comes back, and we can call .stack on it. Okay, so what that is, at least some content for talking about why we want to use new error. Like I said, we were just returning a value, and for geolocation we can do better, and we just helps us start having more context. Okay, so that's the first thing. So in this case, commit with new error. Now for the second part of this, part 2, actually I want you to learn about fetch, because we're going to actually use fetch in 5.2, and before we move on to talking about what the code challenge is, I want you to actually learn about this. So I was going to use color codes, but actually I think I found something a little better. So in this case, Broad's actually pretty cool. I actually have listened to his content before. So what you're going to do is you're going to go all the way to about the 9-minute mark. Okay. So what I say here is rename, because I actually didn't anticipate not using color code for this, but I decided, you know what, let's just rename color code JS to async and add comments at the top for learning fetch and then code along. Now, because I actually want you to do this, and it's kind of a fun thing with Pokemon that he's going to do, update your script tag before you start coding to reference async, and then do this to make sure that you have working code, and then do it after, right? So first update it to be script, and then after bring back the app.js, so that ultimately when you get to the code challenge next, you'll be set up to go. Okay, so then you'll say learning about fetch, because we're going to use fetch when we go to the AQI, and I thought, you know what, it's always good to have a little more context for why what we're going to use before we use it. All right, so and then you'll just submit your commit history for this, and hopefully, I don't know if I did a great job here talking about error, but hopefully you understand that that's calling new error, and I guess that's what I'd want you to, instead of just returning or rejecting on the error message itself, fairly what I would call best practices to call new, create a new object that gives us better debugging, that debugging we saw in the dot trace. In this case, did we update? Yeah, we did it here so that we could see that dot trace, just to know, or stack, sorry, so that we know it's there. So more debugging we could do. All right, submit your commit history, and then let's move on to the code challenge.